She was laughing. Not a small laugh. Not a polite, cover-your-mouth kind of laugh. A full, head thrown back, perfectly glossed lips wide open laugh. The kind of laugh that fills a room and makes everyone look over. And he was standing right there in front of her, holding a coffee cup that wasn't even his, wearing a jacket that had a small tear near the left pocket. His shoes were clean, but not expensive. His watch was the kind you buy at a pharmacy when your real one breaks. He hadn't shaved in 2 days. His hair wasn't styled. He wasn't trying. He never tried. And she was laughing at him, not behind his back, not in a whisper to her friend across the room, directly at him, in front of 12 people at a company mixer that HR had organized on the rooftop of the building where they both worked, where they had both, apparently, been working for the past 3 months without ever once running into each other until tonight. He didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't look away. He just looked at her the way a man looks at something he finds genuinely interesting. Not hurt, not embarrassed, not angry, curious, like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided yet whether he wanted to solve. She said it again, because the first time hadn't felt like enough. She said, "I don't date poor men. No offense." And then she turned back to her friends and kept laughing. And he took a slow sip of the coffee that wasn't his. And somewhere across that rooftop, a man in a very expensive suit caught his eye and gave him a look. A very specific look. The kind that said, "Does she know?" And he gave a very small shake of his head. No, she didn't know. She had absolutely no idea. Before we go any further, if you have ever in your life watched something and thought, "I need everyone I know to see this," this is that story. Hit subscribe right now. Share this video with somebody who needs to feel something today. Drop a comment below and tell me, are you Team Grace or Team Marcus? Because by the end of this, you are going to have very strong feelings. I promise you that. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand that rooftop moment, you need to understand who these two people really are. Her name was Grace Calloway, and Grace Calloway had a system. It wasn't something she was ashamed of. It wasn't something she hid. In fact, if you asked her about it at brunch, and her friends asked about it often because it never got old, she would explain it clearly, confidently, and without apology, the way a person explained something they thought about deeply and arrived at after real experience. The system was simple. A man had to have his life together, not kind of together, not on the way to together, together, now, present tense, because Grace had already done the other thing. She had already loved a man who was almost there, almost stable, almost ready, almost going to make it, and almost had cost her 4 years of her life. A shared apartment she had to crawl out of with garbage bags full of her own clothes at 2 a.m, and a level of emotional exhaustion that had taken her the better part of 2 years to recover from. She was 37 years old. She was the senior director of client partnerships at Calloway and Reed, which, yes, had her last name in it, but no, her father had not given her the job. She had interviewed for it. She had earned it. She had been at the company for 6 years, and she had climbed every single rung of that ladder with her own hands and her own brain, and a work ethic that her assistant privately described as terrifying in the best possible way. She had a 2-bedroom apartment in Midtown that she had decorated herself over 3 years, one piece at a time, because she refused to rush it. She had a standing Saturday morning spin class and a standing Sunday evening phone call with her mother in Cincinnati and a group of her girlfriends she had known since college who she trusted with her actual life. She was not looking for someone to save her. She was not looking for a project. She was not interested in potential. She wanted a man who had already done the work, who had already figured out who he was, who could sit across a dinner table from her and not need her to carry the conversation, the check, or the emotional weight of the entire relationship. Was that too much to ask? Her friend said no. Her mother said, maybe give it a little more flexibility. Honey, Grace said the system stays. And for 3 years since the garbage bags and the 2 a.m. exit, the system had worked exactly as intended. She had gone on dates. She had met men. Some of them were lovely. Some of them were interesting. Some of them had potential written all over them, and she had very politely wished them well and moved on, because she was not a rehabilitation center for men who hadn't figured out yet. She was Grace Calloway, and she had standards. the night of the rooftop mixer. She had almost not gone. She had been in a meeting until 6:45 that ran over because the Donovan account had hit a snag, and she had needed to personally smooth over 3 different people's feelings before anyone could go home. By the time she got to her office, grabbed her blazer, fixed her lipstick in the small mirror she kept in her top drawer, and made it up to the roof, the mixer had been going for 40 minutes. Her friend and colleague Diane was already there, 2 drinks in, waving her over with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for reinforcements. Diane was 41, hilarious, recently divorced in a way she described as the best decision of her adult life, and Grace's closest friend at the office. They had bonded 3 years ago over a shared hatred of a particular client who used the word synergy without irony, and had been inseparable at work ever since. Grace grabbed a glass of wine from the table near the entrance and made her way over to Diane, who immediately pulled her into a small group of people from the marketing and operations floors she half recognized and half didn't. The conversation was the usual mixer conversation. Projects and deadlines and weekend plans, and have you heard about the restructuring rumors, and who do you think is actually leaving, and who do you think is being brought in? Grace was good at this. She was warm and sharp and funny in the right doses, and she knew how to make people feel seen in a conversation without giving away anything real about herself. It was a skill she had developed over years of client work, and it translated beautifully to situations like this. She was mid-sentence about something, the Donovan account, probably, or maybe the catering situation at the last company event. She couldn't remember, when Diane nudged her. "Who is that?" Grace turned. He was standing near the edge of the rooftop, close to the railing, not really talking to anyone. He had a coffee cup, not a drink. A coffee cup at a company mixer with an open bar, which Grace noted immediately. He was wearing dark pants and a navy jacket that was fine. Normal. Nothing remarkable. His posture was easy, relaxed, like he wasn't a mixer at all, like he was just standing somewhere waiting for something, and the party had simply built up around him. He wasn't unattractive. That wasn't the word. He was, if she was being honest, actually quite striking in a way that she couldn't immediately explain. He had a kind of stillness about him, a quietness. He wasn't scanning the room the way most people did at these things, looking for the most important person to talk to, or the most attractive person to talk to, or the nearest exit. He was just standing there, present, unhurried, looking at the city like it was something worth looking at. "I don't know," Grace said. "New hire?" "I haven't seen him before," Diane said. "And I notice everyone." "You do notice everyone. It's a gift and a curse." Grace watched him for another moment. He glanced over then, not in a searching way, just in the way people do when they feel eyes on them. He looked at her. She didn't look away, because Grace Calloway did not look away from things. He gave a very slight nod. Acknowledgement, not a smile, not a wave, just a nod, the way you'd acknowledge someone you were pretty sure you'd seen before, but couldn't place. She turned back to Diane. "He looks like he shops at Gap," Diane said. "Nothing wrong with Gap." On him, nothing wrong with Gap. Diane agreed. He's got a face that makes everything work. Grace laughed a little and sipped her wine, and that was supposed to be the end of it, except that 15 minutes later, he was somehow standing near their group, not in it, not trying to join it, just geographically nearby, and Diane, who had no fear and no filter, and who Grace loved desperately for both of those things. Diane said, "You work here?" He looked over. "Something like that," he said. His voice was low and even, not performative, not trying to be interesting, just the voice of someone who was comfortable making words. "No," Diane asked. "Sort of." "I'm Diane. Marketing." "Marcus," he said. He looked at Grace. She looked back. "Grace," she said. "Client partnerships." "Grace," he repeated. Just that, like he was filing it somewhere. The conversation opened up slightly after that, the way conversations do when a group absorbs a new person. Someone asked Marcus which floor he was on. He said he moved around. Someone asked what he did. He said operations broadly, which, Grace noted, was either the vaguest answer possible or the most honest, depending on who you were dealing with. She was trying to figure out which one it was when someone in the group, Trevor from marketing, who Grace found exhausting, Started talking about his recent vacation to Portugal and how business class had changed his life and how he could never go back to economy, which launched the group into the conversational territory of nice things and nice places, and a particular pleasure of being someone who could afford nice things and nice places. Grace participated in this conversation fully because she had worked hard and she liked nice things and she wasn't embarrassed about that. At some point it turned, the way these conversations do, into the topic of relationships. Who was seeing someone? Who had recently stopped seeing someone? Trevor mentioned that he was talking to someone new, a woman he'd met at a charity event, very put together, very successful, which he said in a particular way that some men say it as a secondary detail rather than a primary one. And then someone asked Grace if she was seeing anyone, and Grace said no, and gave her usual answer, the short version, the diplomatic version, the version she gave at work events, that she was focused on herself right now, which was true, and that she had high standards, which was also true. And then Trevor, who again Grace found exhausting, said, "What kind of standards?" "Like height requirements," and laughed at his own joke. And Grace said, evenly, with the confidence of someone who has said a thing many times and believes it completely, "I don't date men who haven't figured out their financial life. It's just not where I am anymore. I've done that. I'm not interested in carrying someone." There was the usual round of reactions. Some nodding. Diane's very specific face that meant she both agreed, and also thought Grace might be slightly intense about it. Trevor's poorly disguised impression that this was a high bar. And then she made the mistake, though she wouldn't know it was a mistake for a long time yet, of glancing at Marcus. He was looking at her, not challenging, not amused, just listening, taking it in, that same still quality he'd had at the railing. And something about the way he was listening, something about the jacket with the small tear and the pharmacy watch and the coffee cup at an open bar, made her say it, made her say the extra thing she didn't need to say, the thing that was not diplomatic, and not the short version. She said, "I don't date poor men." And she laughed, because it was funny to her, because it was true, because she had had wine and it was a rooftop and she was tired from the Donovan account and she didn't think it mattered. He didn't react. He took a sip of his coffee. He looked at her like she was a puzzle he hadn't decided yet whether he wanted to solve. And she turned back to her friends and kept laughing. His name was Marcus Webb, and Marcus Webb had a system too. His system was almost the opposite of Grace's in every visible way, which would have been funny to him if he'd known about it at the time, and which became very funny to him later, in a way that had layers to it. Marcus didn't care about appearances. This was not a discipline he had to practice. It was just how his brain was wired. He genuinely, constitutionally, could not make himself care about whether his jacket was from a designer or a department store, whether his shoes announced his net worth before he walked into a room, whether the car he drove matched the zip code he was driving into. He had tried, early on in his career, when advisors and image consultants had told him he should, and it felt like wearing a costume he grabbed from the wrong rack. So he had stopped. He drove a truck, a regular 10-year-old pickup truck that he'd had since before everything changed and had kept because it started reliably and had good cargo space, and he genuinely liked it. He got coffee from the diner 2 blocks from his apartment when he was in the city because the coffee was good and the owner, a 70-year-old Greek man named Pappas, always had 3 things to tell him about the neighborhood, and Marcus liked hearing them. He wore what was clean and comfortable and what didn't require him to think about it. He had learned a long time ago. Learn the hard way. Learn that the way you learn things that permanently change how you see the world, that the most important things a person had could not be assessed by looking at them. Marcus Webb was 42 years old. He had grown up in Dayton, Ohio, in a house that was small but never empty, with a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who worked 1 job and coached youth basketball on weekends, and a grandmother who lived in the back room and made the best biscuits in the state, and an older sister who had decided at age 12 that she was going to be an engineer and had, in fact, become one. He had not come from money. He had come from people who understood the value of money because they'd had to count every dollar of it. He had gone to Ohio State on a combination of scholarships and loans and sheer stubbornness. He had studied business because it was practical and because he had this idea, this quiet, persistent, slightly ridiculous idea that he could build something. He didn't know what. He just knew the feeling. The feeling of wanting to make something from nothing. The way his parents had made a good life from not much. The way his grandmother had made Sunday dinners out of whatever was left in the kitchen. He had started his first company at 26 with a partner and $11,000, and an idea about operational efficiency in mid-sized logistics companies that everyone he talked to said was either too early or too specific or too boring to work. It worked. Not immediately. Not without pain. Not without 2 years of him living in a one-room apartment eating cereal for dinner and taking any consulting work that came in just to keep the lights on. Not without a period, somewhere in year 3, when the whole thing almost fell apart and he sat in his empty office at 11 o'clock at night and thought very seriously about whether he should just call it. He didn't call it. By year 5, they had 40 employees and 3 major clients and a reputation in their space that was starting to spread in ways that felt real and not just hopeful. By year 8, they had been acquired. By year 10, Marcus had built the next thing. And the next thing after that. The company he ran now, Web Consolidated, which operated under a holding structure that most people in his building didn't know about, because most people in his building knew the operating companies by their individual names rather than by the parent entity, had just over 300 employees across 4 subsidiaries. One of those subsidiaries was the firm where Grace Calloway worked. He had acquired Calloway and Reed 14 months ago in a deal that had been quiet, as his deals usually were. Not secret, just not announced with fanfare or press releases, or the kind of corporate theater he found wasteful. The operational leadership had stayed in place. The culture had stayed in place. He'd restructured the back-end financials, brought in 2 new board members, and left the people who were good at their jobs to do their jobs, which was how he operated. He was on a rooftop that night because his head of integration, a man named David, had told him there was a culture issue beginning to develop on 2 of the floors at Calloway and Reed, and he wanted to see it with his own eyes before he decided what to do about it. He'd told the integration team he was coming and told them not to announce it, because announced visits were theater and he wasn't interested in theater. He had not expected to find Grace Calloway. He had not expected to stand near a small group of people at a rooftop mixer and hear a woman, a clearly intelligent, clearly capable, clearly striking woman, deliver the precise statement that she did not date poor men, while looking directly at him, while laughing. He had found it genuinely interesting, not insulting, not infuriating, not devastating. Interesting, because he had spent his entire adult life watching people mistake the package for contents. Had built 3 companies partly on the insight that most of his competition was so focused on looking like the smartest people in the room that they missed what was actually happening in the room. He had watched investors dismiss deals because the pitch deck wasn't polished enough. He had watched clients choose worse vendors because the worst vendors' team wore better suits. And now he was standing on the roof of a company he owned, being assessed and categorized and found lacking by a woman whose paychecks had his signature on them, whether she knew it or not. He did not tell her. David caught his eye across the rooftop. Mal, does she know? Marcus shook his head. No, she didn't know. He took a sip of his coffee. He thought about puzzles. He saw her again 4 days later. Not on the roof. Not at a mixer. In the elevator bank on the 14th floor, where he was on his way up to meet with the operations team, and she was on her way down to a client meeting, based on the portfolio she was carrying and particular focused energy she had that told him she was already mentally inside a meeting that hadn't started yet. She almost didn't see him. She was looking at her phone, reading something, one hand on the portfolio, her whole body aimed forward the way it got when she was in motion toward something. Then the elevator doors opened and they were both standing there, her waiting to go in, him just coming out, and she looked up. She recognized him. He could see it happen. The small recalibration, the rooftop memory surfacing, the micro-expression of something that was not quite embarrassment but was adjacent to it. "Hi," she said. "Good morning," he said. She got on the elevator. He stepped to the side to let her pass. She pressed the lobby button. He reached past her, not close, just functional, and pressed 14. "Going up?" she asked. "Operations meeting," he said. "Do you always go to meetings on the floors that aren't yours?" "I move around," he said. Same answer as the mixer. Same even delivery. She looked at him for a second, like she was trying to figure something out, and didn't have enough data yet. The elevator went down first, toward the lobby, and then the mechanism would bring it back up for 14. They stood in it together for 32 floors of descent, which is a long time to be in an elevator with someone you recently laughed at. She said, eventually, "I owe you an apology." He looked at her. The rooftop. She paused, choosing the word carefully. "Blunt. You were honest," he said. "I was rude." "Those aren't always different things," he said. She blinked, not offended, thinking about it, like she was actually considering whether that was true. "Fair," she said. The elevator reached the lobby. The doors opened. She stepped out and turned back, portfolio in hand, meeting in her eyes. "I'm Grace," she said. "I know," he said. "You told me on the roof." "Right." A small pause. "Well, I'm sorry, Marcus." She said his name like she'd just retrieved it from somewhere and wanted to confirm it was the right word. He nodded. The doors closed. He went up to 14. She went to her client meeting. And that was the second time. The third time was different. It was a Tuesday. Grace was in the office kitchen at 7:30 in the morning. Earlier than most people, because she liked the quiet of the early office, the way it felt like the building belonged to her for just a little while before it filled up. She was making a cup of tea and looking out the window at the city coming awake and thinking about the Donovan account, which had become the kind of slow-rolling problem that you couldn't fully solve but had to keep managing, like a leak in a roof that wasn't big enough to call an emergency, but was always just there, in the back of your mind, dripping. She heard someone else come in. She turned. Marcus. He was in the same general register of clothing. Clean, dark, nothing remarkable. And he had what she would come to recognize as his characteristic expression, which was the expression of someone who was not performing a single thing. He was just there, present, making coffee. "You're here early," she said. "I'm always here early," he said. "Operations meeting again? Different thing today?" She watched him make his coffee. He was economical about it, not rushing, not showing off, just making coffee the way a person makes coffee when they've done it 10,000 times and stopped thinking about it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. He looked over. "What exactly do you do here? I've asked around a little, and nobody seems to quite know." He considered her for a moment. "What have people told you?" "That you're in operations, that you consult, that you were brought in from outside after the acquisition." A small pause. "The acquisition was 14 months ago, which would make you one of the longer-term consultants I've heard of." He didn't say anything right away. "Am I wrong?" she asked. "No," he said. "But you're not going to clarify." "Not right now," he said. She found this both annoying and fascinating, which was a combination she didn't encounter often and which she recognized as a warning sign of particular kind. She had learned, over 37 years of being herself, that the things that were both annoying and fascinating were the things that had the most potential to disrupt you. She looked at him steadily. "You're very comfortable not explaining yourself." "Yes," he said. "Most people aren't." "I've noticed." "Does that mean you've thought about it? Or that you just are that way?" He looked at her. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't read yet. Not because it was hidden, but because she didn't have the key for it yet. "Both," he said. She picked up her tea. "Well, good morning, Marcus from Operations." "Good morning, Grace from Client Partnerships," he said. She went back to her office. She thought about the conversation for the next 40 minutes, which annoyed her, because she had a problem to solve about the Donovan account, and she did not have 40 minutes to spend thinking about a man who made coffee in the kitchen and wouldn't explain himself. She spent the 40 minutes anyway. Over the next 3 weeks, they kept running into each other. It was the kind of thing that, at first, Grace filed under coincidence. The office had 8 floors and a couple hundred people. It was a normal thing to keep seeing the same person, especially if that person, as Marcus apparently did, move around between floors and departments the way other people move between meetings. But it accumulated. A shared table in the office cafeteria because everything else was taken. Another elevator. A moment near the coffee station where they both reached for the same kind of cup and then both pulled back. And he said, "Go ahead." And she said, "No, you go." And they both laughed a little, and it was the first time she'd seen him laugh. And it did something unexpected to the temperature of the room. Each conversation was short. No more than 5 or 10 minutes. Nothing deep. Nothing personal. Nothing that should have been accumulating into anything. And yet, Grace was not a person, who deceived herself. She had worked very hard over the years to be someone who saw things clearly, who did not tell herself comfortable stories about uncomfortable realities. It was one of her better qualities, and also one of her harder ones. So she noticed that she looked for him in the morning when she got to the kitchen. She noticed that when she saw the elevators and knew she was going to the same floor she'd seen him heading to, she lingered for just a second, which was not like her. She noticed that in the conversations they had, which were still short, still surface level, still maddeningly uninformative on his side, she was more present than she was in almost any other conversation in her day. She told Diane. Not all of it. Diane was her friend, but Diane was also a person who would make a very significant deal out of this, and Grace was not ready for a very significant deal to be made. She said, "That Marcus from operations, do you know anything about him?" Diane's eyebrows went somewhere interesting. "I know he's been in and out of the building for about 2 weeks. I know accounting had a meeting with him that apparently lasted 3 hours. I know he's not on the company directory, which is weird. Not on the directory?" I looked. I was curious after the mixer. Diane paused. "He's either a very high-level consultant or he's in some part of the organization that operates separately from a main structure." "What would that mean?" "I don't know. Maybe he's board adjacent. Maybe he's brought in for specific projects and doesn't get a standard listing." Diane looked at her. "Why are you asking?" Grace was quiet for a second. "Grace, we've had some conversations." Diane's face arranged itself into an extremely specific expression that Grace had seen before and which meant, "I have approximately 14 things to say about this, and I'm trying to decide the order." "What kind of conversations?" "Short ones. Nothing. Just—" Grace stopped. "I'm curious about him." "You're never curious about men." Diane said, "Not like this. Curious in the way you're saying it. I'm always curious. I'm a curious person. You're an analytical person. That's different from curious. Curious is when you want to understand something because it interests you, not because you're gathering data." Diane paused. "Which is it?" Grace looked at her. "Both," she said. Diane made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a shriek, but was somewhere in between. "Do not make a thing of this," Grace said. "I am absolutely making a thing of this," Diane said. "But I'll be discreet about it." "You are never discreet." "I'm discreet in my heart," Diane said. "That's what counts." She almost found out by accident. It happened on a Wednesday morning, for weeks after Mixer, during a meeting that Grace was running in the large conference room on the 11th floor. It was a partnership review, 12 people, department heads and senior staff, going through the quarterly numbers and planning the Q3 strategy. Grace was mid-presentation. She was good at these. She knew the numbers better than anyone in the room, knew the story they were telling, knew where the weaknesses were and how to frame them honestly without creating panic. She had her slides up and she was talking to the Donovan account and 2 other key partnerships, and the room was with her, engaged, following. The door opened. Late arrival. Grace didn't pause. She kept talking, because pausing for late arrivals was the kind of thing that disrupted a room's energy, and she didn't do it. But she tracked a movement in her peripheral vision the way experienced presenters do, and then the room changed. It was subtle, but she felt it. A subtle shift in the air of the room. A small collective straightening in chairs. A quality of attention that was different from the attention people gave her, which was professional attention, the attention of people engaged in a work task. This was a different kind of attention. The kind of attention you give to someone when you're not entirely sure what's expected of you and you want to be ready. She finished her point about the Donovan account and let her eyes move to the door. Marcus was standing there, not at the table, not taking a seat, just standing at the door, the way he stood everywhere, with that quality of presence that didn't announce itself but couldn't be missed. He looked at her. She looked at him. The room was very quiet. Grace recovered first. Because she always recovered first, because she had learned a long time ago that the person who recovers first in an unexpected situation is always the person who has actually been paying attention. "Glad you could join us," she said, professionally, normally, as if this was a normal thing that had happened. He stepped into the room. Someone pulled out a chair. He sat. He did not have a laptop. He did not have a notepad. He just sat with the easy attentiveness he brought to everything, and the room quietly reformed around him the way rooms did. Grace kept going. But something had shifted. She noticed, over the next 20 minutes, that the questions being asked and the answers being given had a different quality when Marcus was in the room. Not that people were performing for him specifically, more that they were more careful, more precise, more considered, like his presence meant something, like what he thought mattered in a different way. When the meeting ended and people filed out, Grace stayed at the front of the room, gathering her things, and she expected him to file out too. He didn't. He waited until the room was empty. "Good presentation," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Carefully. The Donovan account. The approach you outlined for Q3. Did that come from you or from the team? Does it matter?" "Yes," he said simply. She looked at him. "It came from me. I've been managing that relationship for 3 years, and I think I have a read on what they need." "I think you do too," he said. Not flattery. An assessment. She put the last of her slides into her portfolio. "Marcus," she said. "Grace." "Who are you?" The question hung in the room. He was quiet for a second, not evasive, thinking about how to answer. "The right answer," he said, "is more complicated than I can give you right now. But I'll tell you this. The work you're doing on this floor is the reason this company is worth what it's worth." She stared at him. "What does that mean?" "It means what it says," he said. He picked up his coffee cup. He walked to the door. He stopped at the threshold. "Have lunch with me," he said. "Tomorrow. Off-site." Not a command. Not quite a request. Something in between. She said, "Why?" "Because we keep talking in 5-minute windows, and I like more than 5 minutes," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Every system she had, the one about potential, the one about men who hadn't figured out, the one about not carrying anyone, was running in the background, doing its calculations. They all came back with the same result. "Insufficient data," she said. "Where?" He named a place. She almost said something about it, because it was a small Italian place 3 blocks from the office that was the kind of place you went on a Wednesday at noon if you wanted good food and a quiet table and didn't need the restaurant to perform its importance at you. It was not impressive by any objective measure of impressive. She almost said something. She didn't. "Fine," she said. "Tomorrow." He nodded. He left. She stood alone in the conference room for just a moment, which was not like her. She was never the person who stood alone in rooms after meetings. And she thought about the way he had said the work you're doing is the reason this company is worth what it's worth. And she thought about what the word work could mean in that sentence. And she felt, for the first time in a long time, the particular unease of realizing you might not have the full picture of something you thought you understood. The lunch happened. The restaurant was exactly what she'd expected. Small, warm, good bread on the table immediately. The kind of Italian place where the owner comes out to say hello if you're a regular. And Marcus was clearly a regular because the owner did come out, a small man named Tony, who shook Marcus's hand with both his and told him the carbonara was very good today. They sat by the window. They ordered. And then they actually talked. Not 5-minute windows. Not snippets at the coffee machine or 30 seconds in the elevator. A real conversation. Over food that was genuinely excellent, in a room where no one was watching them from a corporate event angle. She found out things. She found out that he was from Dayton, that his parents were still there, still in the same house he'd grown up in, which his mother had very specific feelings about redecorating, and which his father regarded as structurally perfect, and therefore requiring no changes whatsoever. That he had a sister who was an engineer and who had recently had a baby and who was, according to Marcus, absolutely terrifying in the best way, which sounded to Grace very much like something you would say about someone you admired deeply. She found out that he read. A lot. Not business books, though those too, but fiction, history, anything that had to do with how people made decisions under pressure. That he thought most organizational problems were people problems wearing the costume of process problems. That he'd once sat in on a negotiation just to observe and had found it so instructive that he started doing it regularly. Just sitting in on situations he wasn't responsible for, listening, taking nothing, giving nothing, just watching how things moved. That must make people nervous, she said. Sometimes, he said, that's usually when I learn the most. When people are nervous? When people are nervous, they stop performing and start reacting, he said. Reactions are real. Performances aren't. She looked at him across the breadbasket. Is that what you did? On the roof? Just watched. Partly, he said. And in the kitchen. And in the elevator. And in every 5-minute conversation since then. Partly, he said again. What's the other part? A small pause. The other part, he said carefully, is that I find you genuinely interesting. She had been expecting that on some level. She had set it up for it with a question. But it still did something to her. The straightforwardness of it. The way he said it like it was just a fact he'd noticed and was reporting rather than something he was deploying. Why? She asked. He thought about it. Seriously considered the question, which she respected enormously. Because you are exactly who you say you are, he said. You are exactly as capable as you present. You are exactly as direct. And you clearly have very high standards for what you let into your life. A pause. And you applied those standards to me on a rooftop about 30 seconds after meeting me, based on a jacket and a coffee cup. She held his gaze. And you find that interesting, not irritating. I find it honest, he said. Irritating would be if you were wrong. A silence opened up between them, not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that has something in it. Are you saying I was wrong? She asked. He picked up his coffee. He did not answer. She thought about pressing. She didn't. After lunch, walking back to the building, she said, I'd like to do this again. He looked at her, something in his face that she still didn't have a word for. Same time Thursday, he said. Thursday works, she said. They walked into the building together and parted at the elevator bank, and she went up to her floor and sat at her desk and stared at her screen for approximately 4 minutes before she actually started working, which was a personal record for her in terms of losing time to thinking about a person. She was in trouble. She knew she was in trouble. She opened her laptop and started working on the Donovan account. 3 weeks. 3 weeks of lunches. Every Tuesday and Thursday. Same restaurant or sometimes a different one nearby. Same quality of conversation. The kind that went somewhere real every single time and never felt like it was trying to. She learned more. She learned about Dayton and Ohio State, and the first company, and the $11,000, and the year of cereal for dinner. She learned about the partner from the first company, a man named Raj who was now running his own fund, and who Marcus still talked to every week, and who he described as a person most responsible for teaching him how to fight for something without destroying it in the process. She learned that he had been in a serious relationship in his early 30s, someone he'd been with for 3 years, and that it had ended because she had wanted to be in the relationship with a version of Marcus who had made it, the successful version, the arrived version, and he had felt in some fundamental way that she had missed who he actually was, the cereal for dinner version, the one who wasn't sure yet. She wanted the destination without the journey, Grace said. She wanted a finished product, he said. And I wasn't one yet, and I don't think I'll ever be one. I think that's not how I work. Grace was quiet. What? He said. Nothing, she said. Just, I think I'm the opposite. How so? She turned her wine glass slowly on the table. I have specifically, deliberately, avoided men who weren't finished products. After a bad experience, I decided I only wanted arrival, completion, people who were already there. He looked at her. And how's that worked out? He said, not unkindly, genuinely asking. I haven't been in a relationship in 3 years, she said. Maybe the finished product requirement filters out too much, he said. Or maybe I haven't met the right finished product. Or, he said, maybe finished is the wrong thing to be looking for. She looked at him across the table. The restaurant was mostly empty. It was a Thursday afternoon. Tony had brought them dessert they hadn't ordered, a small plate of something with almonds and honey, because Tony had apparently decided they were worth the extra effort. You're very comfortable challenging my framework, she said. Your framework is interesting, he said. That's what you say instead of wrong. No, he said. If I thought it was wrong, I'd say wrong. I think it's interesting. I think it comes from somewhere real, and it's been serving a real purpose, and I think it might be costing you something you don't know it's costing you. She was quiet. That's very close to a judgment, she said finally. It's an observation, he said. You can do whatever you want with it. She looked at him for a long moment. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Okay. And I want you to actually answer. Not the it's complicated thing. Actually answer." He nodded. "What do you do?" she said. "Not operations broadly. Not consulting. What is your actual role in this company? Because it's been 6 weeks since the rooftop, and in that 6 weeks I've asked other people. I've looked at the directory. I've thought about every conversation we've had, and I cannot figure out what you actually are here. And I'm not someone who can't figure things out." He was quiet, not evasive, not deflecting. Quiet in the way a person is quiet when they're deciding to say something true that is going to change the situation. "I was going to tell you," he said. "Tell me now," she said. He looked at her directly. "The acquisition you mentioned," he said. 14 months ago." "Yes, that was mine," he said. She went very still. "Webb Consolidated acquired Callaway and Reed 14 months ago," he said. "I'm the CEO of Webb Consolidated. This is one of 4 companies under my holding structure." The restaurant was quiet. Tony was somewhere in the back, clattering dishes, humming something. Grace looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Grace. She thought about the jacket, the pharmacy watch, the coffee cup at the open bar. She thought about 32 floors of elevator going down. She thought about the conference room and what he'd said. "The work you're doing is the reason this company is worth what it's worth." She thought about every person in that conference room and how the room had changed when he walked in, how she felt the change before she'd seen the cause. She thought about the rooftop. She thought about laughing. She said, "You own the company I work for." "Yes," he said. She sat with that for a moment. "And you knew who I was," she said. "At the mixer, I knew your name and your title," he said. "I didn't know you. But you let me—" She stopped. "I didn't let you do anything," he said quietly. "You made a judgment. You were honest about it. I didn't correct it because I was—" He paused. "I was curious who you were when you thought I was nobody." She looked at him. Something moved through her that she couldn't immediately name. Not anger, exactly. Not humiliation, though there was a thread of that in it. Something more complicated. "That's—" She started and stopped. "I don't know if I think that's fair," she said. "Maybe it isn't," he said. "I'm not claiming it was perfectly fair. I'm telling you what it was. The whole time," she said, "every conversation, every lunch. Every conversation and every lunch," he said. "And the thing I learned is that you are exactly who you present to be, Grace. Exactly. I wasn't testing you. I was finding out who you are. And who you are is someone who is—" He stopped. "What?" she said. He looked at her. "Worth knowing," he said. The word landed in the room like something placed carefully on a surface. She breathed. She picked up her wine glass. She set it down without drinking from it. "I need a minute," she said. "Take whatever you need," he said. She looked out the window. The city was going past, indifferent, beautiful, enormous. She thought about the system. She thought about what he'd said about finished products. She thought about a woman on a rooftop with wine and a tired day behind her, laughing at a man in a plain jacket who she had not yet understood was the quietest, most capable, most present person in the room. She thought about that woman, and she thought. She didn't have the whole picture. She turned back to him. "I owe you a second apology," she said. "You don't," he said. "I do," she said. "The first one, in the elevator, was for being rude. This one is for being a small pause, wrong about what I was looking at." He was quiet. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think I understand now why you didn't say anything." "Does it feel fair?" he said, genuinely asking. She thought about it. "It feels human," she said finally, "which is different from fair, but maybe more honest." He nodded slowly. Tony appeared from the back, looked at the two of them, and retreated immediately without saying a word, which was the exact right call and probably why Marcus had been coming here for years. "I'm going to go," Grace said. She stood. She gathered her things with her usual efficiency, the portfolio, the bag, the small straightening of herself that he had come to recognize as her reassembling. "Grace," he said. She looked at him. "Thursday," he said. "Just that." A long pause. "Thursday," she said. She walked out. She called Diane from the street. Not a text. A call. Because this was a call situation. Diane picked up on the second ring. I'm in a meeting. I need to tell you something. Diane was quiet for exactly 1 second. I'm not in a meeting, she said. I'm stepping out. Give me 30 seconds. 30 seconds of ambient office noise, and then quiet. Talk, Diane said. Grace stood on the sidewalk. People moving around her. The city doing its city thing in every direction. Marcus, she said. Yes. He's the CEO of a company that acquired us. Silence. Diane. I'm processing. Diane said. He's been our owner for 14 months. He runs the holding company. He's worth. She stopped. She actually didn't know the number, and the fact that she didn't know the number and had never thought to research it was something she was going to think about later. He's the man you laugh at on the roof. Diane said. Yes. When you said you didn't date poor men. Yes. He owns the company. That is what I just said, Diane. Grace. I know. Grace. I know. A beat. He knew, Grace said. The whole time. He knew who I was before the mixer. He let me. He didn't correct me. He watched me make that judgment, and he just... She breathed. He said he was curious who I was when I thought he was nobody. Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was more careful. And who are you? She said. Grace opened her mouth. Closed it. That's the part I'm working on, she said. Thursday came. She went. She had spent the days between their last lunch, and this one doing the thing she always did when something unsettled her, which was work. She had poured herself into the Donovan account and 2 other client files and a strategic memo she'd been putting off writing, and a performance review for her junior associate, that she wanted to be honest and precise and useful. She had gone to spin class on Saturday and called her mother on Sunday and tried to sound more normal than she felt. Her mother said, You sound like you're thinking very hard about something. I'm always thinking very hard about something. Grace said, This is a different kind of thinking hard. Her mother said, This is the kind you did when you were 16, and you made a decision, and then you got new information. Grace was quiet. What decision did you make, and what information did you get? Her mother asked. It's complicated, Grace said. The complicated things are always the interesting ones, her mother said. Grace thought about Marcus saying, Interesting is what I say when something is real. I'll tell you more later, she said, when I know more. Okay, honey, her mother said. Just remember, the system is a map. Maps are useful, but they're not the territory. After the call, Grace sat in her living room for a long time, in the quiet of the apartment she had built piece by piece. And she thought about that, the map and the territory, the way she had drawn her map based on where she'd been hurt, and had used it ever since to navigate away from anything that looked like the road she'd been on before. And the thought she couldn't quite shake, the one that had been there since the restaurant, since Thursday. What if she had been applying a map to the wrong kind of terrain? The Thursday lunch was different. Not uncomfortable, almost the opposite, like something had been cleared out of the air between them. Something that had been there, without either of them naming it, and now that it was gone, the actual air was cleaner. She asked him about the company. The real questions, the ones she'd been thinking about. What had the acquisition looked like from his side? What did he see in Callaway and Reed that made it worth acquiring? What did he think of the leadership team he'd inherited? What did he think of the people? He answered, directly and thoughtfully and without condescension. He talked about what he'd seen in the company's structure that was solid and what had needed to change. He talked about the culture, the particular mix of competitive and collaborative that was harder to maintain than most leadership teams realized, and that Callaway and Reed had been managing pretty well, which was why he left the operational leadership in place after the acquisition rather than installing his own team. She said, Why did you come to the mixer personally? That level of integration oversight is usually delegated. He said, David flagged a culture issue. I like to see things directly. She said, What did you think of the culture issue? He said, I thought it was being overstated. The floor has some tension, but it's productive tension. The people who are worried about it are the people who prefer things to be comfortable over things being good. She said, That's a fairly strong assessment from one visit. He said, I've been running companies for 16 years. Some things you can see quickly. She said, What else did you see quickly? He looked at her. You, he said. The word was simple and it was enormous, and she let it sit between them without deflecting it, which was new for her, which was something she noticed herself doing, and made a note of the way she made notes of things that were significant. She said, "I'm trying to figure out what this is." He said, "Okay, between us, what this is." He was quiet for a moment, thinking honestly. "I don't have a clean answer," he said. "I don't think there is one at this point. I think it's something that started one way and has become something else." "When did it become something else?" she asked. "Elevator," he said. "You apologized to me and you meant it, and you said it like someone who was accountable, without needing to perform the accountability. That was," he stopped, "that was when I knew I wanted to know you." She breathed. "Marcus," she said. "Grace, this is very complicated," she said. "Yes," he said. "You are technically my employer, at multiple removes, but still." "Yes," he said. "And we started under circumstances that were not ideal," he said. "That's a very mild description of what they were," she said. He almost smiled. She had noticed that about him. He almost smiled more than he actually smiled, and when he actually smiled, it was worth the wait. "What do you want to do?" he said. The question was direct and honest and put entirely in her hands, and she felt the weight of that, the respect of it, the way he was not pushing, not angling, just genuinely asking. She looked at him across the table. She thought about the map. She thought about the territory. "I want to keep having lunch," she said. He nodded. "And I want you to tell me things," she said. "Actually tell me things. No more it's complicated, or it's more than I can say right now. If I ask you something, I want a real answer." "Okay," he said. "And I want to figure out the rest slowly," she said. "I'm not," she paused. I moved carefully. "I think that's not going to change." "I know," he said. "I prefer it." She looked at him. "You prefer I move slowly?" "I prefer you don't do anything you're not sure of," he said. "I've waited for things to be right before. I'm not in a hurry." Something in her chest that she was not going to ascribe to anyone right now. Not yet. "Okay," she said. "Then, we keep having lunch." "We keep having lunch," he agreed. Tony brought coffee and didn't say anything, and they sat by the window with the city going past and talked about smaller things, easier things, books they'd read and their thoughts on the neighborhood, and whether Tony had always had that painting Capri on the wall, or if it was new. And the afternoon went the way good afternoons go, without your permission, without your awareness, just gone, and you barely noticed until you looked up and the light was different. The thing Grace had not anticipated was how it would feel to know who he was, to see him in the building now and understand the geometry of it differently. She was on the 14th floor. He was somewhere above that, structurally speaking, in a way that wasn't about floors but about the whole shape of things. She noticed things she hadn't noticed before. The way the ops team moved when he walked through the floor. The way David, his head of integration, deferred to him in a way that was very specific, very layered. The deference of someone who understood that the person they were deferring to was simultaneously easy to underestimate and dangerous to underestimate. She noticed that he never traded on it. He didn't name drop himself. He didn't casually reference the size of the operation. When she asked him about his other companies, he talked about the people running them, the challenges they were working on, the things that were going well and the things that weren't. Not the numbers. The humans inside the numbers. She found this, of all the things she found about him, the most impressive, because in her experience, the numbers were what men led with. The numbers were the first thing, the calling card, the proof of value. She had been in enough rooms with enough successful men to know that most of them needed you to know the numbers early, needed the numbers to do some of the work of introduction, needed the numbers to tell you who they were before their actual character had to. Marcus never led with the numbers. He led with his attention. And his attention, Grace was discovering, was the most substantial thing she'd ever had aimed at her. She called her mother on Sunday, and this time said more. She said there was someone. Her mother waited. She said it was complicated. Her mother said she knew. She said the man was, and she tried to find the word, the right word, the honest word, quiet. And she didn't mean quiet like he didn't talk. She meant quiet like he didn't need the noise, like he was comfortable inside himself in a way that didn't require constant confirmation. Her mother said, "That sounds like your father before I knew he was your father." Grace said, "What do you mean?" Her mother said, "When I met your dad, he was the quietest person at every party. Not because he was shy, because he didn't have anything to prove. And I kept watching him from across rooms thinking, who is this man? And it took me 2 months to go talk to him because I was a little intimidated, which I never told him and am telling you now because apparently I have no secrets anymore." Grace laughed. 2 months, she said. He was very calm, her mother said. It was unsettling. Calm men are unsettling to women who are used to managing chaos. "I don't manage chaos," Grace said. Her mother was diplomatically quiet. "Mom, you are very good at everything, sweetheart," her mother said. "You are also very comfortable being the most competent person in the room. A man who doesn't need you to carry anything might take some getting used to." Grace sat with that for a long time after the call. The most competent person in the room. She thought about Marcus in the conference room, in the restaurant, in the elevator, in the kitchen. She thought about his assessments. Quick, accurate, delivered without flourish. She thought about the way he had sat in her partnership review and listened, and at the end had asked whether the Donovan approach had come from her or the team, not because it didn't matter, but because it did matter, because he wanted to know where the intelligence was coming from. She thought, he is not in any of these rooms because he needs to be the most competent person in them. He is in them because he wants to understand what's actually happening. She thought, that is a very different thing. She thought, I think I have been surrounding myself with people who need what I give them. She thought, I think this man does not need anything I have. She thought, I have no idea what to do with that. It was 5 weeks after the restaurant revelation when the first real problem arrived. It arrived in the form of a man named Garrett Holt. Garrett was a partner at a competing firm, and someone Grace had known professionally for 4 years. He was the kind of successful that announced itself clearly. The suits, the car, the very curated casualness about all of it, the way he mentioned things without appearing to mention them. He was attractive, charming, and he had been interested in Grace on and off since they'd met at an industry conference in 2020, and she had filed away as a professional acquaintance situation and mostly left it there. He called her on a Tuesday. He had heard, through channels that she understood were professional but probably weren't entirely professional, that Callaway and Reed was under new ownership, and he wanted to have coffee and discuss what that might mean for some joint opportunities. Grace agreed because she was a professional, and coffee for professional reasons was a professional thing. The coffee was not entirely professional. Garrett was warm and direct and interesting, and he made her laugh twice in the first 10 minutes, and she noted that about herself, that she was laughing, that she was responding to him, that he was, objectively, by any measure, everything she would have described 6 months ago as what she was looking for. He asked about the new ownership structure. She was careful, said what was public, which was not much. He said, Webb Consolidated is interesting. Marcus Webb is interesting. Do you know him? Something in her chest shifted. I've met him, she said. He's one of those founders who operates completely under the radar, Garrett said, which is either a genius move or a red flag, depending on how you look at it. Or neither, Grace said. Maybe it's just a preference. Garrett looked at her with a slight, curious smile. You sound like you've thought about it. I've thought about a lot of things regarding the acquisition, she said. Professionally, Garrett leaned slightly forward. Can I be honest with you? Always, she said. I've been meaning to call you for a while, he said. Not just about this. I think we've been circling something professionally for 4 years, and I'm curious what it looks like if we actually go toward it instead of around it. She looked at him. He was the right age, the right achievement level. He had made it. He was present. He was clear. He was not asking her to carry anything. He was exactly what the system she'd built said she should be looking for. She thought about Marcus. She turned her hand over. He covered it. Tony came out of the back room, looked at them, and went back into the back room very quickly, and did not come out again for 20 minutes. It was 7 weeks after the restaurant, 9 weeks after the rooftop, and Grace Callaway was falling in love with Marcus Webb. She didn't say this, not to herself, not in any specific clean sentence. But she knew it the way she knew things that were true before she had language for them. In her body, in the particular quality of her attention when she was near him, in the way the city looked different on the mornings after she'd seen him, like everything had been given a slight additional layer of meaning. She knew it when she called her mother on Sunday, and her mother said nothing for a long moment, and then said, "Oh, honey," in a particular way that meant she heard something in Grace's voice that Grace hadn't said. She knew it when Diane walked into her office on a Wednesday afternoon with 2 coffees and sat down uninvited and said, "Tell me everything," and Grace actually told her everything, the whole thing. The rooftop and the elevator and the acquisition and the lunches and Garrett and the hand on the table. And Diane listened to all of it without interrupting once, which was genuinely unprecedented and which told Grace that Diane understood this was serious. When she finished, Diane said, "You know what's insane about this?" "Several things." Grace said, "He could have corrected you immediately." Diane said, "On the roof." He could have said, "Actually, I own this company." He could have made you feel like an idiot. "I know," Grace said, and he didn't. No. He wanted to know who you were without the information. Diane said, he wanted to see the real you. Grace was quiet. And the real you, Diane said, was a woman who had 1 glass of wine and said something rude, and then apologized the first chance she got and kept showing up honestly. It wasn't a great first impression, Grace said. It was an honest one, Diane said, and apparently that's what he's been waiting for. Grace thought about that, about honesty as a thing being tested, not elegance, not performance, not the curated version of yourself that you bring to rooftop mixers. "Diane," she said, "yeah, he saw me before I saw him." "I know," Diane said. "That's," she stopped, "terrifying?" Diane said, "Yes," Grace said. "And also, I think, exactly right." Then things got complicated. Not between them. Between them. Things were building in a way that was slow and careful and real, the way Grace had always wanted things to build, except she had apparently needed a man who owned the company she worked for to show her what that actually looked like. The complication came from the company side. A restructuring. David came to her on a Friday afternoon and said that Webb Consolidated was looking at changes to the partnership division, not cuts. He clarified immediately, seeing her face. Restructuring. A re-architecture of how the client partnerships team operated that might involve consolidation of some functions, new reporting lines, a possible absorption of 2 separate teams into one under a single director. She said, "When was this decided?" David said, "It's in discussion." She said, "Is my role changing?" David said, "That's part of what's under discussion." She said very carefully, "Who is making these decisions?" David looked at her. She knew the answer. She went home that night, and she sat in her apartment with the lights not all the way on, and she thought about the things she had not let herself think about in full, the things she had been holding at arm's length, that he was her employer, that the man she was falling in love with controlled the company she had spent 6 years building a career inside, that any structural decision affecting her work, her role, her trajectory, any of it, came ultimately through him. She thought about her system. Not the no poor men version, which felt very far away and very small now. The deeper system. The one about not losing herself. The one about keeping her footing. The one about making sure that in any relationship, she remained intact. She thought, how do you remain intact when the man you are falling in love with also signs your paycheck? She thought, how do you know if your role gets restructured, whether it was a business decision or something else? She thought, how do you know if you're being seen or being managed? She did not call him that night. She sat with it. In the morning, she called Diane and said, "I need advice." Diane said, "I've been waiting for you to say that." "There's a restructuring," Grace said. "I heard. My role might change." Diane was quiet for a moment. "Are you going to ask him about it?" "I don't know," Grace said. "That's the problem. I don't know if asking him is, if that's the right move or if that blurs something that should stay clear." "You mean you don't know if asking your boyfriend to tell you about the restructuring of your job is a relationship conversation or a power conversation?" "He's not my boyfriend," Grace said. "Grace." "He's not officially." "Grace." "He held your hand in a restaurant for an hour and Tony brought out a special dessert, and you said his face when you told him it was him looked like something real. He is your boyfriend." Grace was quiet. "Yeah," she said. "Ask him," Diane said, "but ask him right, not as your boss, as the person you're building something with. Tell him what you need. Tell him what you're worried about. That's what you do with someone you trust. Grace thought about trust. She thought about a man who had watched her laugh at him on a rooftop and had said nothing, and had waited and had shown up 14 times for lunch and put his hand on a table and looked at her like she was worth knowing. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. She said, "Can we talk?" "Not lunch. Just, can we talk tonight?" He said, "Tell me where." She went to his apartment. This was the first time. She had not been to his apartment before, and the act of going there was its own kind of statement, its own kind of step across a line she'd been standing at for weeks. It was not what she expected. She had expected something. She hadn't known what exactly. Something expensive, maybe. Something that announced itself. Something that said, "I have made it," in the language that most people use for that statement. It was a good apartment in a good building. Clean, well-organized, books everywhere. Not arranged for appearance. Not alphabetized or color-coded or placed on shelves like they were objects rather than things he'd read. They were everywhere. Stacked on surfaces, tucked into corners, with tabs and note cards sticking out of them. There was a well-worn couch in a kitchen that had clearly been used, and a window that looked out at the city, and a desk that had the look of a desk someone actually worked at rather than a desk someone bought. There was a photo on the wall of him and a woman who was clearly his sister, the engineer, and a man and woman who were clearly his parents, all of them at what looked like a backyard somewhere. And his father was laughing, and Marcus in the photo looked younger, and was actually fully smiling, and she looked at it for a moment and felt something. She sat on the couch. He made tea without asking. He brought it over. He sat, not too far from her, not performatively close. She said, "I heard about the restructuring." He nodded. "From David." She said, "I know," he said. "I asked David to inform the relevant parties." She looked at him. "Am I a relevant party?" "Yes," he said. "Professionally." A pause. "What does the restructuring involve for my department?" she asked. He told her, clearly and directly. He laid out the structural change, the consolidation of 2 teams, the new reporting line, the director position that would oversee both. He told her why it made sense from an operational standpoint, what problem it was solving, what had led to the decision. She listened to all of it. When he finished, she said, "Is the director position mine?" He looked at her. "If you want it," he said. She breathed. "I need to ask you something hard," she said. "Ask," he said. "Is that decision," she paused, assembled the question carefully, "is that decision about my work, or is it about this?" She gestured very slightly between them. He understood exactly what she was asking. He was quiet for a moment. "The decision about the restructuring," he said carefully, "was made 4 months ago, before the mixer, before the elevator, before any of this." He paused. The conversation about who the director would be was always going to be a conversation about who the best person for the role was. And the best person for the role is you. That is a business conclusion. She looked at him steadily. "You understand why I needed to ask?" "Yes," he said, "and I want you to always ask." "I want," he stopped, started again. "I know what the structure looks like from the outside. I know that it makes some things harder. I don't want you to be in a position where you can't ask me a direct question, because you're worried about what angle it's coming from." "Can you always keep those things separate?" she said. "The business decisions and us?" He was honest about this. She could see him being honest, which she had learned to recognize, which was a quality of his face when he was thinking rather than performing. "I'll try," he said. "I think. Yes, I think I can. But I think the more important thing is that you can always ask me. Always. And I'll tell you the truth, even if the truth is complicated." She looked at him. She thought about everything. "I don't want a different job," she said. "I mean, I don't want a director position because you offered it to me. I want if I've earned it and if I'm the right person for it." "You are," he said. "But I need that to be evaluated by someone who isn't." She paused. "Who isn't looking at you the way I'm looking at you?" he said quietly. She met his eyes. "Yes," she said. He nodded. "David can handle the official evaluation. He's done this before, and he's good at it. He doesn't know about this." He gestured, mirroring her gesture from earlier, between them. "And if you want to keep it that way, we keep it that way." She sat with that for a moment. "You do that?" I do whatever keeps you able to trust the process, he said. Your professional integrity matters to you. It should. It's part of who you are. I'm not going to be the thing that compromises it. She looked at him for a long time. Marcus, she said. Grace. I came here tonight because I was scared, she said. I was scared that I was going to find out that the thing happening between us was going to cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. He was very still. And, he said, she breathed. I think, she said slowly, that the thing happening between us might be the thing I can't afford to lose. He looked at her. She looked at him. And then, for the first time at his kitchen table, over tea in good mugs in a lived-in apartment with books everywhere and a photo of him laughing with his family on the wall, they were actually finally really honest about it. All of it. What it had been since the rooftop, and what it had become, and what they both wanted, and what scared them, and what didn't, and what the structure meant, and what it didn't mean, and what they were willing to do to figure it out. They talked for 4 hours. When she left, it was past midnight. He walked her to the door. She turned back. He was standing in the doorway, in a plain shirt and no jacket, and the light was behind him, and he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had made something from nothing and had kept himself in the process, and who was looking at her like she was worth all the patience it had taken to get here. She said, I'll see you Thursday. He said, see you Thursday. She went home. She called nobody. She sat in her apartment in the quiet, and she thought, this is what it feels like when something is real. 3 months. They had 3 months of something that was real. Real was not simple. Real was complicated and required constant navigation and had moments of friction and required exactly the kind of conversation that Grace was good at and Marcus was patient with, and together they were somehow very well suited for. David ran the evaluation. Grace went through it the way she went through everything, completely, honestly, on her own terms. She did not talk to Marcus about the specifics of the evaluation during the process. She had David's report in front of her at the end, and it said what she already knew, what she had worked for 6 years to be true. She was the right person for the role. She took the director position. She was good at it. She had always been going to be good at it. Marcus watched from a distance that was exactly the right distance, which she appreciated more than she could say. At work, they were professional, completely, without conversation or agreement. They had found the line and stayed on their respective sides of it when they had business interactions, and they had some. Through the new reporting structure, they were clear and respectful and appropriate, and no one watching would have seen anything other than two capable people working well in proximity. Outside work was different. Outside work, she found out that he could cook, not elaborately. He was a simple, good cook, the kind who knew 5 or 6 things well and did them without consulting a recipe. He cooked for her twice in that 3 months in the apartment with the books everywhere, and both times it was good, and both times the conversation was better than the food. She found out that he woke up at 5:30 in the morning and ran in the city before the city was fully awake, which she found slightly insane and also admirable. She found out that he had strong opinions about coffee and no opinions about wine, which was fine with her because she had opinions about wine. She found out that he was funny in a way that didn't announce itself, dry and quiet and completely unexpected, and that the unexpectedness of it made her laugh harder than she had laughed in years. She found out that when something was wrong with her, when she was tired or frustrated or carrying something, he didn't ask repeatedly or push or problem-solve uninvited. He just made himself available, stayed close enough that she knew the option was there, and let her decide when to use it. This was, she realized, exactly how she needed to be cared for, and the fact that he had worked it out without her having to explain it was something she thought about often. She found out that he called his parents on Sunday mornings, every Sunday, without fail. She found this out because one of their Sunday afternoons started with a Sunday morning, and she was there when he made the call, and she sat in the kitchen with tea while he talked to his mother about his sister's baby and his father's retired man schedule and neighborhood things, and whatever his mother had recently learned about a neighbor that apparently she found both concerning and delicious. And Grace listened from the kitchen and felt something in her chest she didn't immediately have a name for. She thought it might be the word her mother had used. Your father. Before I knew he was your father. She started to understand that sentence in a way she hadn't before. The night everything changed, really changed permanently, was not dramatic in its setup. It was a normal Tuesday. She had worked a long day. He had worked a long day. They met at the Italian place. Their place now, Tony's place, where Tony had progressed from strategic retreating to leaving a standing order for their usual table and whatever was good that evening. They were mid-dinner. She was telling him something about a client situation, and her phone rang. She would normally let it go. They had a during-dinner rule about phones. But she saw the name, and her face changed. "It's my mother," she said. He said, "Take it." She picked up. Her mother's voice was the voice of someone who was keeping themselves together with effort. She said, "Honey." Grace felt it immediately, the way you feel it before the words come. She said, "Mom." Her mother said, "It's your father. The doctors are saying it's his heart." The restaurant went very quiet in Grace's world. She held the phone, and her face was very still, the way a person's face is still when everything inside it is moving very fast. She said, "How bad?" Her mother said, "I don't know yet. They're running tests." "He's stable right now." They said, "Stable, but I don't." Her mother's voice broke slightly. "Grace, I don't want to be here alone." She said, "I'm coming." She hung up. She looked at Marcus. He was already looking at her with a quality of attention that she recognized, that she had learned. That meant he was completely present and completely ready and waiting only for whatever she needed. She said, "My father, his heart, I have to go to Cincinnati." "Tonight?" he said. "Tonight," she said. "Okay," he said. No hesitation. "Let me drive you home to pack. I'll book you the next flight out." "You don't have to." "Grace," he said. She stopped. She looked at him. "Let me help," he said. Simply, she thought about her system, about not being carried, about not needing someone to carry her. She thought, there is a difference between being carried and being helped. There is a difference between needing someone to manage you and having someone present when things are hard. She said, "Okay." He was good in the crisis in the way she now knew he was good at everything. Without drama, without performance, without making it about anything other than the task. He drove her home. He helped her pack, or rather he sat in her living room and was calmly there while she packed, which was what she actually needed. He found her the next flight to Cincinnati, 2 hours away, and booked it without asking about price, which she noticed and would think about later. He drove her to the airport. At the drop-off, she had her bag and her coat, and she was in the mode she went into when things were serious, which was focused and forward and very contained, because that was how she managed. That was her version of holding herself together. He got out of the truck. He walked around. He put his hand on her face. It was the first time he'd done that. First time anything like that. They had been careful in a way she had never quite talked about but understood and appreciated. And this was different from careful. This was just human. Just one person with their hand on another person's face. Because the world was big and scary right now, and presence was the only real thing. She breathed. She put her hand over his. "He's going to be okay," Marcus said. Not empty reassurance. She could tell the difference. Just a steady certainty of someone who needed the world to be okay for her sake. "I know," she said. She leaned her forehead against his for 1 second. 1 second. Then she straightened. She picked up her bag. She was Grace Calloway, senior director who was about to be present for her mother in Cincinnati, and she needed to go. "I'll text you when I land," she said. "I'll be awake," he said. She looked at him for one more moment. "Marcus," she said. "Go," he said. "I'll be here." She went. Her father was okay. It took 4 days to know that completely. 4 days of tests in waiting rooms and her mother's hand in hers, and a particular exhausted love of sitting in a hospital and willing the person you love to be all right. But by Thursday, the doctors were clear. The cardiac event had been serious, but caught early and with management and medication and some lifestyle changes, he had a very good prognosis. Her father, recovering in a hospital bed, held her hand and looked at her and said, "You look different." She said, "I haven't slept in 4 days." He said, "That's not what I mean." He'd always been perceptive. Her father, quiet in the same way she was starting to recognize as a quality she valued, not showy about it, just observant, just taking the world in. She said, "There's someone," Her father said, "Tell me." She told him, the short version, and then, because he kept asking questions, the long version. The rooftop and the elevator and the company and the lunches and the restructuring and the apartment and the books everywhere and the family photo and the airport drop-off with his hand on her face. Her father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You know what I like about this man?" She said, "What?" He said, "He waited. A man who can wait for the right moment is a man who understands what's worth waiting for." Grace thought about that. She said, "He's not what I thought I was looking for." Her father said, "They never are. Your mother thought she was looking for someone decisive. I spent the first year of our marriage practicing, making decisions faster. So she'd think she found what she was looking for. Turns out what she was actually looking for was someone who cared enough to do that." He paused. "The thing you're looking for and the thing you need are different categories, Grace." She looked at her father, in his hospital bed with a monitor making small sounds and the window showing a gray Cincinnati afternoon. She said, "I know." He said, "Go home." She said, "Mom needs." "Your mother has 3 friends from church on rotation." He said, "She is well covered. You've been here 4 days. Go home." She looked at him. "There's someone to go home to," her father said. "Not a question." She breathed. "Yes," she said. "Go," he said, "and bring him to meet us when this is over." She flew home on Friday. Marcus picked her up from the airport. He was just there at the gate in the plain jacket, and she walked to the terminal and saw him, and something very large and very quiet happened inside her. She walked up to him. She said, "He's okay." He said, "I know. You kept texting." She said, "I kept texting because..." She stopped. "I wanted you to know." He looked at her. "I know," he said again. Different meaning this time. She had not cried once in Cincinnati. She had been strong and present and steady for 4 days, and she had not cried. She cried now, not dramatically, not in the way it happens in movies, just quietly, with her face pressed against his jacket, in the middle of an airport terminal with the world going around them, because she was tired and her father was okay, and she had missed someone for 4 days, and the missing of it had surprised her, and the surprise of it was the truest thing she'd felt in years. He held on. He was very good at holding on. 6 months. 6 months after the rooftop. 7 months after the elevator. 8 months after Tony's restaurant and the hand on the table. She met his parents. This happened because Marcus was going home for the weekend, one of his regular trips, just him driving back to Dayton on a Saturday morning, which he did every couple of months, which he had come to understand was important to him in a way that wasn't about obligation, but about actual love. And he asked if she wanted to come, not casually, seriously, with the seriousness of a man who understood what he was asking. She said yes. The drive to Dayton was 3.5 hours, and she found out 2 things during it. That he was a good person to drive with, not anxious, not chatty, just present and comfortable with the silence that good travelers know is not emptiness, but a kind of companionship, and that he sang along quietly to 2 songs on the radio and then immediately looked like he'd forgotten she was in the car. She said nothing and smiled at the window. His parents' house was exactly what he had described. Small, well-kept, full. Full in the way houses are full when they are genuinely lived in. When every surface has something on it, that means something to someone. When the walls have photos that are there because someone wanted to look at them, not because they came with a frame. His mother was a small woman with very direct eyes and a quality of warmth that was not performed. She hugged Grace immediately. Not the kind of hug where someone is checking you out while pretending to hug you. An actual hug. The hug of someone who has decided you are welcome before she's had time to decide anything. His father was tall, quieter, with the kind of face that had done a lot of living and was comfortable with what it had found. He shook her hand and then, after a moment, also hugged her, which he felt was significant. His grandmother was in the back room and was, as described, the author of Extraordinary Biscuits. She was 91 years old and had opinions about everything and shared them completely, and Grace found her absolutely wonderful. Dinner was a production, not a formal one. A messy, affectionate, everyone talking at once, more food than necessary production. That was a kind of meal that reminds you what meals are supposed to be. His sister was there with the baby, and the baby was, objectively, Spectacular, and Grace held her, and the baby grabbed her finger, and Marcus watched Grace hold his niece from across the table with an expression that she didn't see because she was looking at the baby, but his mother saw it and exchanged a look with his father that contained everything necessary. After dinner, his mother found a moment to be alone with Grace in the kitchen. She said, "He's different." Grace said, "Different how?" His mother said, "He's always been. He's never not been good. But he's been." She looked for the word, held back, like there was always a part of him that was waiting for something to be worth the full thing. Grace was quiet. "He's not holding back," his mother said. "With you, I can see it." Grace thought about the airport, the hand on her face, the 4 hours of conversation, and the 12 weeks of lunches, and the patient, present, unhurried way he had been building something with her. She said, "I can see it too." His mother looked at her for a moment with those direct eyes. "You gonna take care of him?" she said. Grace said, "I'm going to try." "Good," his mother said, and handed her a dish to dry. And that was that. On the drive home the next day, in the comfortable silence that they had learned was a form of conversation for them, she reached over and put her hand on his hand on the gear shift. He turned his hand over. She interlaced her fingers with his. They drove. The thing that almost broke, it was unexpected. Things that almost break things usually are. It came in the form of an article. A business publication she hadn't heard of ran a piece about Webb Consolidated and its acquisition portfolio, written with a particularly aggressive framing that some business journalism uses, the kind that positions every move as either predatory or incompetent and has no vocabulary for anything in between. The article was about the restructuring at Callaway and Reed. It framed it as a classic acquisition end strip situation. It implied that the director appointment had been made for reasons that were not strictly about merit. It quoted an anonymous source inside the company. It did not name Gray specifically, but it described the director position in enough detail that anyone who knew the company would know who it meant. She found it on a Tuesday morning, coffee in hand, before the day had really started. She read it twice, then she put her phone down and looked at the ceiling for a moment and breathed. Then she called Marcus. He picked up. She said, "Have you seen it?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Tell me you're not the source." He said, "Grace." She said, "I know you're not. I know. I needed to hear you say it." He said, "I am not the source. I would not do that to you or to anyone in my organization." She breathed. "I know. The anonymous source," he said, "is someone I have a very good idea about, and I'm handling it." She said, "I don't want you to handle it for me." He was quiet. She said, "I don't want you to go fight my battle. I need to handle this myself. What I need from you is to not. I need you to not step in." She could feel him thinking about that. She could feel the restraint it was requiring. "That's going to be very difficult," he said honestly. "I know," she said. "Do it anyway?" A pause. "Okay," he said. She handled it herself. She had been preparing a comprehensive briefing on her first 6 months in the director role, results, strategy, team performance. For the full board presentation anyway. She moved it up. She presented it 2 weeks early. She put every number in front of every board member, and she walked through what the team had done and what the evidence said about the merit of every decision made under her leadership. The board received it exactly the way you receive something when the data is unambiguous and the presentation of it is excellent. The article did not get a follow-up. The anonymous source eventually became clear, not to the public, but internally, as someone on the operations side who had been resistant to the restructuring from the beginning and who had, after a conversation with David that Marcus was not in the room for, chosen to move on from the organization. Marcus did not step in. He told her afterward, at the Italian place, that not stepping in had been one of the hardest things he'd done recently. He said it plainly, and she received it the same way. She said, "You didn't, though." He said, "I didn't." She said, "That's," she paused, "that's the thing. That's the reason I know this works." He looked at her. She said, "I've spent 3 years not wanting to need anyone, and I still don't want that. But what you just did, not doing the thing you wanted to do, because I needed to do it myself, that's not the same as needing you. That's something else." He was quiet. She said, "What do you call that?" He thought about it seriously, the way he thought about everything that mattered. He said, partnership. She held that word. Partnership. She had been looking for something complete, something finished, something arrived. She had found something better. She had found someone who was still becoming, who had never stopped becoming, who looked at her becoming and didn't need it to be done yet, who was willing to sit in the process with her and figure out in real time. She had found a partner. She looked at him across the table. Tony was somewhere in the back, humming, outside the window. The city was doing the things cities do in the late afternoon, going gold at the edges, beautiful and indifferent and enormous and entirely unconcerned with the small, large things happening inside one restaurant at one table. She said, I want to tell you something. He looked at her. She said, I was wrong on the roof. He waited. She said, not just about you specifically, about the whole framework, about what I thought I was looking for, and what I thought mattered, and what I told myself about what kind of person I wanted. He was quiet. I was looking for a rival, she said, for completion, for someone who had already done all the becoming, and was just there, done. She looked at him. You're not done, she said, and I'm not done. And that used to be the thing I was most afraid of in a relationship. And now, she stopped. She found it. The word. Now, she said, it's the thing I'm most glad about. He looked at her the way he looked at her on the roof, in the elevator, in the kitchen, in the conference room, in every 5-minute window, in every long lunch, and every quiet moment in cars and kitchens and airports, like she was worth all of it, worth every second of the patience and the waiting and the complicated structure and the board presentation and the Cincinnati flights and the Dayton drives and all of it. He reached across the table. She took his hand. Tony, emerging from the back room, observed this, went back in, came out a moment later with a bottle of something excellent he had clearly been saving. He said nothing. He opened it. He poured 2 glasses. He went back into the back room. The city went gold. Her mother met him at Thanksgiving. This was 4 days after Grace had sat down with her mother on the phone and told her, properly, fully, the whole story, rooftop to airport, elevator to Dayton, the director position, an article and a hand on her face, and Tony's restaurant and all of it. Her mother had listened without interrupting, which, like Diane's version of this, was unprecedented and therefore significant. When Grace finished, her mother said, he owns a company. Yes. And you laughed at him. Yes. And he didn't say anything. No. Her mother said, Grace Elizabeth Calloway. Grace said, I know. He waited, her mother said. He waited and he watched and he showed up and he never used the power he had over you. No, Grace said. He never did. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Bring him to Thanksgiving, she said. Grace said, is that too soon? Her mother said, your father has been asking about him for 3 months. Bring the man to Thanksgiving. He came to Thanksgiving. He brought wine that he had researched because he did not know about wine and did not pretend to, and had asked Grace's sister-in-law, who was a sommelier, for her recommendation, and then followed it exactly. He brought something for Grace's father, a book he had mentioned in passing on the phone, a history of a particular era he'd said he was curious about, and Grace had mentioned to Marcus and didn't know how he knew and didn't ask. He did what he always did. He was present. He listened. He asked questions that showed he'd been paying attention to everything she'd ever said about her family, which was considerable, and he remembered the details. And he was good with her father's dry humor and her mother's directness and her brother's need to know everything about everyone before he decided how to feel about them. Her brother, who was 4 years older and had always reserved particular judgment for men in Grace's life, took Marcus aside after dinner. She watched from across the room. She couldn't hear what they were saying. At the end of the conversation, her brother nodded, once, slowly, the nod of a man who had received answers he was satisfied with. Later, she asked Marcus what her brother had said. He said, he asked me what my intentions were. She said, he actually said that. He said, he actually said that. She said, what did you tell him? He looked at her. He said, I told him the truth. She said, which is? He was quiet for a moment. That I intend, he said carefully, to be someone worthy of the trust you've given me, that I don't take it lightly. that I know it was not easily given. A pause, and that I'm in this completely, however long it takes to become whatever becomes. I'm in it. She looked at him for a long moment. My brother liked that answer, she said. I know, he said. He told me. She almost laughed. She did laugh. He almost smiled. He did smile. 1 year after the rooftop, they were back on the roof. Not a mixer, not an event, just them on a Sunday evening, with coffee for him and wine for her, and the city spread out below them in the particular way cities spread out when the light is leaving, all of it lit up and enormous and indifferent and full. She was thinking about the rooftop a year ago. She said, I was so certain. He looked at her. About what I wanted, she said. About what mattered. About my ability to assess a situation in about 30 seconds and know what I was dealing with. He was quiet. I wasn't wrong about everything, she said. Some of the things I was looking for were real. I did want someone who was capable and clear and who didn't need me to carry them. I was right about that. You were, he said. I was just wrong about what that looks like, she said. I thought it looked like announcements, presentation, the visible version of capability. She looked at him. It looks like you, which is quiet and doesn't announce itself and wears a jacket with a small tear in it, because you don't think the jacket is the point. He looked at her. The jacket had a tear in it, she said. Did you know that? On the roof that night. He said, I think I might have. She said, and you didn't care. He said, no. She said, I used to think that meant you weren't paying attention. He said, and now. She looked at him. Now I know that you pay attention to the things that matter, she said, and the jacket is one of them. He reached over. He took her hand. The city was going dark at the edges and bright in the center, the way cities do, the way they will keep doing long after any of us are paying attention. She thought about everything. She thought about a map that had been drawn on pain and use of protection, and had kept her safe for years, and had also been wrong about this. She thought about her father saying, the thing you're looking for and the thing you need are different categories. She thought about her mother saying, he's different. She thought about Marcus in the elevator, not flinching. Marcus in the conference room, asking where the intelligence came from. Marcus at the airport with his hand on her face, saying, I'll be here. She said, I'm glad I laughed at you. He looked at her. She said, I know that sounds insane, but I'm glad. Because if I'd been, she stopped. If I'd been performing or careful or trying to make an impression, you would have seen a different version of me, and you needed to see the real version. Even when the real version was not great. He said, the real version was honest. She said, it was wrong. He said, you were honest about being wrong. That's not nothing. She looked at him. Do you know what I thought? He said, when you said that on the roof? When you laughed. She shook her head. He said, I thought. She has no idea. She has no idea what she's looking at, and she's completely certain, and she's completely wrong, and she's completely real. A pause. I thought, he said, I'd like to know this person, the person who is that honest and that wrong at the same time. She breathed. And, she said, and he said, I do. She looked at him. The city glittered. He was still. He was always still. She had learned that his stillness was not blankness. It was depth, the stillness of someone who had been moving very fast inside for a very long time, and had learned to let the inside do the work without the outside performing it. She leaned toward him. He met her. And there on the rooftop, 1 year after the laugh, in the city they both lived in and the company he owned and the life she had built and the thing they had made together from the most unpromising beginning she could have imagined, there they were, exactly where they were supposed to be, not finished, not arrived, just in it, completely, fully, wholly in it. A week after the rooftop anniversary, Grace's phone rang at 7 in the morning. She was in the kitchen. Marcus was there. He stayed now, 3 or 4 nights a week, in the apartment she had furnished piece by piece, and had put 3 books on the nightstand on the side and a spare charging cable on the floor. And these were small things and enormous things at the same time. She looked at her phone. Unknown number. New York area code. She almost let it go. She answered. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice. professional, careful, the voice of someone who had been told to be professional and careful. She said, "Is this Grace Calloway?" Grace said, "Yes." The woman said, "I'm calling from the offices of Harrington Group. We've been asked to reach out to you about a position. Senior Vice President of Partnerships, operating company level, reporting directly to the board." A pause. "We were given your name as a specifically recommended candidate." Grace went very still. She said, "Who recommended me?" The woman said, "I'm not at liberty to say at this stage, but the position is—" She described it, the scope, the authority, the compensation structure, which Grace cataloged without moving a muscle in her face. It was significant. It was, objectively, the next step, the next natural step in a trajectory she had been building for 6 years. It was also, clearly, a company that was not web consolidated. She said, "Can I have 24 hours? The woman said, "Of course." She hung up. She turned. Marcus was looking at her from the kitchen doorway with his coffee cup, which she recognized as one of the mugs from her cabinet that he had quietly claimed as his, the blue one, without asking, and she had never said anything because it was the right mug for him. He had heard enough. She said, "That was a recruiter." He said, "I heard." She said, "Senior VP, different company. Significant." He said, "Yes." She said, "Did you?" "No," he said. "Immediate. Clear." She looked at him. He said, "I did not. I want you to know that completely." She held his gaze. "I believe you," she said. He breathed. "But—" She said, "But it complicates things either way." He said, "Yes." She said, "If I take it, I leave the company you own, and that changes—" "Nothing," he said. She looked at him. "Nothing between us," he said. "You think what we are to each other is contingent on where you work." She said, "No, but you're a person who cares about the companies he builds, and I would be leaving one of them." He looked at her for a long moment. He said, "Grace." She waited. He said, "You are more important than any company I have ever built." She held that. She said, "And if I stay?" He said, "Then you stay because you want to, not because of me." She looked at him across the kitchen. She thought about the system that used to say finished products only. She thought about how finished products had nothing left to learn and nowhere left to go, and that was a whole problem with finished products. She thought about a man in a jacket with a small tear in it, standing on a roof, not performing anything, just present. She thought about what her mother had said, the map and the territory. She thought about what her father had said. A man who can wait for the right moment understands what's worth waiting for. She thought about what Marcus had said to her brother. "I'm in this completely." She thought about Tony's restaurant and airports in Dayton, and Thanksgiving, and the books on the nightstand, and the blue mug. She thought about 1 year ago. She thought about who she had been and who she was. She said, "I'm going to take the meeting." He said, "Okay." She said, "And then I'm going to make the right decision, whatever that is." He said, "Okay." She said, "And it might not be the decision that keeps things simple." He said, "I know." She said, "And you're not going to—" "I'm in it," he said, "completely. I told your brother. I'm telling you again." A pause. "Whatever you decide, I'm in it." She breathed. She put down her phone. She picked up her tea. She sat down at the kitchen table in the apartment she had built piece by piece and looked at the man who had a specific mug and 3 books on a nightstand and who had never once needed her to be anything other than exactly who she was. She said, "I love you." She had not said it before. He had not said it before. She had said it now because it was true, and because she had spent too long in her life being careful about true things, and she was not interested in being careful about this one anymore. He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. Then he said, "I know." She looked at him. He said, "I've known for a while. I was waiting for you." She said, "Why didn't you say it first?" He said, "Because you needed to say it in your own time, and I was not going to rush that." She thought about patience, about the kind of patience that is not passive but deliberate, that has chosen to wait because it understands the value of timing. She said, "You are a very unusual man." He said, I know. She said, Marcus. He said, Grace. He put his coffee down. He came to the table. He said it. 3 words, quiet, in the kitchen, over tea and blue mugs, and 1 year of everything it had taken to get here. 3 words, no fanfare, no performance. Just the truth. 6 months later, she took the SVP role. She thought about it for 3 weeks. She talked to her mother and her father and Diane and her brother, and she thought about it alone in her apartment late at night. And she talked to Marcus, really talked to him about all of it, the ambition and the loyalty and the structure and the love and what it all meant in combination. She took it. She gave her notice at Callaway and Reed with the professionalism she brought to everything. She transitioned her team carefully. She said goodbye to Diane in a lunch that lasted 3.5 hours and involved 2 bottles of wine and a decision to meet every 2 weeks forever, which they have kept. Marcus did not make it easy or hard. He made it hers. She started the new role, and it was exactly as significant as it had sounded, and she was exactly as right for it as the data suggested, because data, in this case, was correct. At work, she was Grace Callaway, SVP. In every other context, she was a person who had laughed on a rooftop and been completely wrong and completely honest, and had found out, in the most unexpected way, that those 2 things together were the beginning of the best thing that had ever happened to her. The proposal happened at Tony's restaurant. Of course it did. Tony knew it was coming. He had arranged, without being told, that their table was a corner 1, the best one, with the lighting that was right and the kitchen view and the extra bread that appeared without being asked. Grace did not know it was coming. She should have. In retrospect, she would say she should have. But he was very good at being unhurried, and she had learned to match his rhythm over 18 months, and she was simply there, present, happy in the uncomplicated way. That is the rarest feeling. He reached into his jacket pocket. The jacket was new, not expensive, but not torn. She noticed this and noted it and understood it to mean something. Because Marcus did not change things about himself or performance, but when something was important, he paid attention to it in a different way. He put the box on the table. Small box. Simple box. He didn't open it yet. He looked at her. He said, I want to ask you something. She looked at the box. Looked at him. She was very still. He said, I could say a lot of things right now. I have said a lot of things over the past 1.5 years. We have had a slight actual smile, a significant number of conversations. She said, we have. He said, so I'm going to say the most accurate thing. She waited. He said, you are the most honest person I have ever been in a room with. You are wrong sometimes, and you are right a lot. And when you're wrong, you say so. And when you're right, you don't need to perform it. You challenge my thinking, and you let me challenge yours. You flew to Cincinnati in the middle of the night and didn't ask me for permission to cry in an airport when you came back. You presented to a board when someone tried to undermine you, and you didn't need me to fight for you. You took a job that complicated things and trusted that we were strong enough. A pause. I have been waiting my whole life to be in a room with someone I did not have to perform for. And I want, he stopped, started again. I want to keep being in the room with you. She breathed. He opened the box. She looked at it. She looked at him. She said, Marcus. He said, Grace. She said, you know what's funny? He waited. She said, you are exactly what I said I wanted. Stable, capable, figured out, has his life together. She looked at him. You just look nothing like what I pictured. He said, do you want me to get a more expensive jacket? She laughed. It was a full, head thrown back, genuinely meant laugh. Same as the roof. Completely different. She said, yes. He looked at her. She said, yes, I'll marry you. And no, don't change the jacket. Tony came out of the back room. He looked at them. He clasped his hands together. He went back into the back room. A moment later, the entire kitchen staff appeared at the door, because Tony had apparently been waiting and had briefed all of them. Small plates of excellent things began to arrive. The city went gold outside the window, and Grace Callaway, who had laughed on a rooftop and been completely wrong and completely honest, and had spent a year and a half learning the difference between a map and the territory, Grace Calloway sat across from the man who had watched her laugh at him and had decided she was worth knowing before she had any idea who he was. And she thought, the thing you're looking for and the thing you need are different categories. And sometimes, rarely, if you're lucky, if you're honest, if you stay wrong in the right way long enough to be corrected, sometimes they turn out to be the same person, wearing a jacket with a small tear in it, holding a coffee cup at an open bar, standing on a roof in the city, waiting. She brought him to Cincinnati for Christmas. Her father shook his hand at the door and said, "So you're the patient one." Marcus said, "I'm told it paid off." Her father said, "Come in. I want to show you something." He led Marcus to the bookshelf in the living room, the one she had grown up with, the one with the family photos and the accumulated reading of a life well lived, and pointed at a book, the history book, the one Marcus had brought at Thanksgiving. It was on the shelf now, not tucked in a pile. On the shelf, spined out, in the place of something that belonged. Her father said, "I finished it last week. You were right about the second half." Marcus said, "I usually am." Her father laughed. Full, surprised, delighted. Grace, standing in the doorway watching this, felt something so large and so quiet that she did not try to name it. Some things don't need names. Some things just need to be stood inside of, fully, with your whole self, without the map, without the system, without the protection of certainty. Some things just need you to be present. She was present. She walked into the room. Her father said, "There she is." Marcus looked over. He looked at her the way he'd always looked at her, like she was a puzzle he decided was worth solving, like she was exactly who she said she was, like she was worth everything it had taken to get here, like she was home, and that all of it, every bit of it, from the laughter on the rooftop to the ring at Tony's table to the Christmas bookshelf in Cincinnati, that is what happens when you are completely, spectacularly wrong about what you're looking at, and completely, accidentally, perfectly right about who you are. If this story moved you, stayed with you, or gave you something to think about, share it with someone who needs to feel something today. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe if you haven't. And come back for the next one, because we are just getting started.